The thought that I would like to share with you this evening, it comes from the second chapter of the book of Genesis, verse 19. And it says that out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air, and he brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called each living creature, that was its name. When I first came across this text, immediately it occurred to me that God can read the thoughts and the intents of every single human heart. And so therefore it was clear that God knew what Adam was going to call these creatures before Adam even opened his mouth. What then was the purpose of God wanting to see what Adam would call them, as though he did not know what he was going to say? As I thought about it a bit more, it became apparent to me that God's foreknowledge does not remove or lessen his ability to experience. In other words, even though God knew what Adam was going to call these creatures, he wanted to see. I can imagine that for a lot of us it's the case that we have friends and family that we have not seen in a long time because geographically they don't live where we live. But imagine that one person that you haven't seen that you long to see. And if they say that they're going to come to visit you, how would you feel? You'd probably feel excited. And you'd make all the preparations that you can to make sure that your reunion is as smooth as is possible. But what often happens, and often is the case, is that when we meet people that we haven't seen in a long time as human beings, something happens on an emotional, on a psychological level that doesn't happen just by simply anticipating their arrival. When we see them, we're moved to tears or to some kind of feeling of ecstasy because even though we knew that they were coming, we actually wanted to see them. Because as human beings, our foreknowledge does not remove or take away our ability to experience. A lot of the time we think about our spirituality with relation to how it affects us. We think about the sacrifices that we have to make. We think about what is it that I'm going to gain out of this. But how many times we actually think about it with relation to how it affects God? See, God himself has a need in his heart. He wants to have communion. He wants to have fellowship with the beings that he has created. And the Bible is so full of examples of this. One of the best examples is found in James chapter 2, verse 23. When James has commented on the righteousness of Abraham, he then goes on to say that Abraham was called the friend of God. Now notice what the verse does not say. It doesn't say that God was Abraham's friend, even though that is true. But it says that Abraham was God's friend. That when God looked down at earth and he saw Abraham, he said, hey, that is my friend. And sometimes we think that this special relationship that exists, that God will look at this relationship and he says himself that that was a friendship. We think that it's only reserved to a select few people who we think are so spiritually mature. But I don't think that that is the case. I remember when I was younger, one of the things that I used to love doing was playing jigsaw puzzles. Now, jigsaw puzzles come in many different shapes and sizes. Sometimes it's 100, sometimes it's 500, sometimes it's 1,000 pieces. But when you compare each and every piece of a jigsaw puzzle, what word would you use to describe how it relates to every other piece? You say that each piece is unique because nothing else can take the place that piece fills. When you're playing a jigsaw puzzle, when you're putting it together, you often go for the most obvious pieces, the edges, because you know exactly where they fit. And we often leave the ones that we're not so sure where they fit. But the point is that until that piece finds its place, that picture can never be complete. See, God's heart is like this jigsaw puzzle. And each and every one of us feel a specific piece that nobody else can feel. And dare I say that maybe there's a piece in God's heart and it has a hole in it, because that piece belonged to Lucifer and that hole may never be filled again. I don't know. But the point is that we have a place in God's heart that nobody else can ever fill, because nobody else matches up to God. Nobody else sees him like you do. And this concept of spending time with his creation is so important to God that he puts a whole day aside, which we call the Sabbath, where we might be able to have fellowship with him. A lot of the times it just becomes like a routine. We think, what's the point in praying? He already knows what I'm going to say anyway. But even though God knows what we're going to say, he wants to see. He wants to experience our friendship. And sometimes with the busyness and the cares of this world, we often leave God neglected. But as we enter into this Sabbath, it's a chance to actually give something back to God. It's a chance to make God happy in a way that we can't do otherwise. Nobody else can take your place in his heart. Only you can fill that place. And so my prayer is that as we go into this Sabbath day, we may realize that it's not just another day where we can just say, yes, I've been to church. But it's a time where we can actually make God happy. We can feel a need in the heart of God. And I pray that this may be a case and that we may be able to live that day feeling more refreshed than we were when we came in.